Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys checking today's video out and spending some time with me. Really appreciate that. Guys, today we're going to be talking about wind. I want to give you guys some advanced theories on how wind affects bass and how it can be a negative, how it can be a positive, how you can use it to your advantage, because it's a fact of life in fishing, man. It's like, it doesn't matter what the direction of the wind is, what the speed, it always plays a role in how you're going to catch fish. So we're going to get into that today's video. Also, guys, real quick before we get started, if you hate Christmas shopping as much as I do, one of the easiest ways you can get around that is, guys, just go into Tackle Warehouse and just check everything out they got there. They have got literally everything that you could possibly want for Christmas as far as people that like the outdoors or fishing. I'll put my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video. If you guys use and bookmark that link, it's a good way to support the channel, because any purchase you make, the channel gets a small percentage of that commission. So really appreciate that, and big thank you from me and my family if you're one of the viewers that are doing that. Really appreciate it. Okay, wind is something you have to accept, man. It's not, you can't cuss the wind. You can't ever, like, use the wind as a negative, because it is what it is, and it's going to be there every single day in some way, shape, or form. So I sort of want to give you guys a good foundational approach on wind and how it affects bass and some things you can do to take advantage of it. Now, like everything else in fishing, you guys that watch the channel here, you hear me talking all the time about water clarity and water temperature and the correlation between those two, because the water temperature and the water clarity, those are the two most important variables in fishing as far as determining the technique and the lures that the fish want. And this is especially important with wind, because when you add those variables together, wind, water temperature, and water clarity, that gives you a great indication of what you want to do. So I sort of want to address it along those particular lines. Now, for the most part, wind is a positive thing when it falls into a certain framework. It's like, usually the days that have a little bit more wind than average, it tends to activate the fish a little bit more, because it breaks up the surface. It makes the fish feel a little bit more secure. It makes it a little bit more active. Now, there is a certain point of which you get where too much wind simply makes it's just not hardly even possible to fish efficiently, because you either blow past an area too fast, or it makes the lure presentation very difficult. So anytime that you get over like a 20-mile-an-hour wind, that can be pretty difficult to fish in. It's just depending upon the situation. It's usually never easy. It's the wind's usually blowing your baits around, makes it hard to cast, and it starts, becoming a negative instead of a positive. But ideally, in my experience, the best winds for fishing overall are about like say a 7 to maybe 12-mile-an-hour wind. 7 to 12 is like perfect. It puts a little bit of chop on the water, but it's not so much that it cuts into your efficiency. It allows you to move around pretty much how you want to, and it breaks up the surface. So that's my favorite type of wind. But again, that depends on the water temperature and water clarity. So let's talk a little bit about both of those. Now, in general, the winter time is when wind is least important. Well, it's least important as far as having to have wind, because the more wind that you have in the winter time, I think makes the fishing more difficult, because number one, it's cold. I mean, in the winter time, if the wind's blowing, it makes it feel a lot colder out there, and it is a lot colder. So you can't underestimate the impact of just, being uncomfortable and having your hands numb. That plays a role in it too. But when you have water temperatures that are pretty much at their lowest point, like if it's in the 40s and 50s, wind doesn't do much to help you out. It doesn't do much to activate those fish whatsoever, because in general, when you're fishing in the wintertime, you're normally fishing a little bit slower, and it's very difficult to slow down if the wind's blowing very hard. So in the winter time of the year, regardless of the water clarity that I have, I like the lightest wind of the year. It's like, I prefer like either a calm condition or no more than 5-mile-an-hour wind. I've had a lot better days on that. It's like, if that wind is blowing 10, 15, 20 miles an hour in the wintertime, it usually makes it very difficult to catch fish. Now, as that water temperature rises a little bit into the spring and starts to get, into the 50s and 60s, that's when wind plays a really good role, a pretty big role. And at this point, you know, you can have a little bit more wind and it's actually a positive. It's like in the springtime of the year when that water temperature, like, you know, between March and May, something like that, you know, I really like those days that you have like a 15-mile-an-hour wind, because those fish are starting to move shallower, and that wind, like a 15-mile-an-hour wind, will really activate those bigger fish on those bigger baits early in the year. So this is the time of year I'm using a big spinnerbait, a big square bill crankbait, a full-size jig, maybe a big swim bait, something like that, and wind will definitely help you out a lot. Again, more so on the cleaner side of the water. One thing you'll find sort of universally is that wind has the wind will not help you out in off-colored water. It's like if you got water visibility that's under 2 feet, most of the time wind will not help you out. It's not going to activate those fish anymore. So in off-colored water, I do prefer a lighter wind 12 months out of the year. But again, as the water gets cleaner, that wind becomes a little bit more important. So from that standpoint, that 15-mile-an-hour wind is really good. Now, a lot of it, again, guys, depends on your technique, because if you're fishing a slow technique, you don't want any wind, or you don't want hardly any wind, because it makes it very difficult if you're pitching and flipping something, or if you're trying to worm offshore, you know. So the deep fish are not as, they don't behave the same on windy or non-windy days. They probably still bite just as good on windy days, but you can't be as effective fishing there. So if I'm fishing, you know, the slow baits, I like a light wind most all the time. So when wind plays a factor, it's usually on the horizontal moving reaction baits. Summertime of the year, a lot of times we'll have those windy south wind days at 20 miles an hour. Again, I don't really like this. It's like in the summertime of the year, if it didn't matter if I'm trying to fish, you know, shallow, dirty water cover, or if I'm fishing out off the bank deep, I don't like those days where that wind's blowing pretty hard. It just makes it very difficult to fish, especially if you're fishing offshore, which I do a lot in the summertime. In the summertime of the year, I normally like a lighter wind for whatever reason. It's like if I'm fishing shallow or dirty water, again, I don't want the wind. If I'm fishing out deeper, I want maybe a little bit of wind, but not much. But I don't prefer much wind. Now, the time of year that I like a lot of wind is in the fall time of the year. It's like from about, you know, late September into like the middle part of November. This is when I love those windy days. And I actually prefer those days where that wind's blowing 15 to 20 miles an hour, because a couple of my favorite techniques to fish in the fall time of the year is waking a spinnerbait. In other words, burning a spinnerbait real fast just under the surface, some type of a topwater lure, and a swim bait. And all of those lures, even the topwater lure, like with a Zara Spook, Whopper Plopper, whatever, if you've got clear water situations, those fish will come up and they'll hit a topwater in a 2-foot chop. I've seen them do it a lot. And obviously a big swim bait or glide bait is better in the wind, spinnerbait, chatterbait, you know, a lot of the different lures that you throw. Shallow cranking can be really good in the wind. It's like if you got a really windy day, you know, that's blowing up on a rocky bank, I catch a lot of fish on a lipless crankbait or a shallow running crankbait. So overall, from a foundational level, I like little to no wind in the spring, moderate wind in the summer, moderate wind in the spring and summer, and a heavier wind in the fall time of the year. That's been my experience in general with it. But the thing about it, it's like wind is not going to be the same everywhere, because depending upon the part of the lake that you're in, you can either expose yourself to a wind a lot, or you can get out of the wind. And again, depending upon the technique, you know, sometimes you want both. Sometimes you're hunting the wind. Sometimes you're specifically looking for those areas where it's getting hit hard by the wind. And other times of the year, you may not want any wind. Like, for example, if I'm fishing in April and all the fish are up shallow and I'm throwing a floating worm or a wacky rig, I want to be able to see those fish. I want to see them cruising down the bank, or I want to see the underwater targets, so I don't want any wind whatsoever. So there's so many different variables to it. It has to do with the lure you're using, the water temperature, water clarity, sunlight conditions is another thing with it. Best condition though overall, I mean, if I could give you guys one overall good fishing conditions, if you have a spring day where that water temperatures in the 50s or low 60s, and you get a prefrontal condition where you have a falling or steady barometric pressure with a south wind that is pretty strong, say 15 miles an hour, and you have an overcast day or raining, you're going to catch a bunch of good ones. That's perfect scenario with it. So it can really help you out. But it's just, you know, you can't, you know, pick and choose unless you pick and choose the days you want to fish. Because I remember when I was really learning how to fish when I was a teenager, every time I'd go fishing on a day where the wind was blowing, my dad goes, "Why do you want to go out there and fish today? It's just all windy. You know, you're not going to catch anything." And I'm like, well, I got to know how to fish in the wind. If I don't fish in the heavy wind, I'll never figure out how to catch fish in it. So you sort of just have to accept it for what it is and make the best of it. But like I said, usually you can get out of it somewhere. It's like I've never been on any lake across the country where you can't find, you know, either some protected water or, you know, marginal wind or heavier wind, and it all depends on the wind velocity and speed. But another thing that I will tell you guys is when you choose your area based upon the wind, don't let your comfort level dictate your choice. Because if you, say for example, if you just want to get out of the wind because you don't want to fish in the wind, you may be taking yourself away from a bunch of good fishing by simply trying to get out of the wind. So like we talked about, every situation is different. Sometimes it's going to help you, sometimes it's going to hurt you. It's just another one of those things that makes bass fishing so tough all the time. So hope it helps out. We'll talk later.